Alright, welcome to Miss Smith's Math Tutorials. I'm Miss Smith. I apologize that my paper is a little crinkled. I've flattened it out to the best of my ability. My cat sat on it, so the next couple pages we do will probably be crinkled. And that is just the life of living with cats. So, alright, in this video we're talking about solving by factoring. So we're going to look at multiple examples. We're going to look at trinomials and binomials, where you'll notice not only do we have, in this example, a trinomial, 1, 2, 3, but we've got this equals 0. And that's going to change some things. Same thing here. We've got an equal sign here. So this one we'll have to do a little more work too, but looking at this, that equals 0, really, the problem is still solved the same. We still go through the same steps, but we've now added a couple steps just right to the end. It's nothing crazy, nothing you can't handle, but we only do these added steps when we have an equal sign. So it's now an equation instead of just an expression, okay? So hopefully you've been reviewing the last videos on factoring 4-term problems, trinomials, and binomials, and you've got those down. You don't want to try solving until you have all of them down and you're easily able to recognize them and what steps come next. Let's look at this first example. I've got a trinomial, okay? It's in the correct form, right? So I've got my x squared. It's in my quadratic, which just as a reminder, our quadratic equation, oh, I wrote 8 because I was looking there, bx plus c. All right, so ax squared plus bx plus c. That's our quadratic form, okay? You'll notice we have ours in the correct form with the x squared first, then the x, then the constant. And we want to make sure that when we've got this equal sign, that it is set equal to 0. So looking over here, if you're peeking, that one's not equal to 0. We'll have to do some work over here. Luckily, this one is already set equal to 0, so we're good to go and go ahead and start factoring this. Okay, so first question we always ask ourselves, do we have a GCF that we can factor out? So I've got a 1, an 8, and a 15. There are no common factors in there other than 1. I can't pull an x out because that has 1 and that has 1, but that one doesn't have 1. So no GCF. I can go ahead and proceed with using my AC method. If you remember for trinomials, that's how we solve it. We label our A, our B, and our C, and we're going to draw a big old X box right there. Okay, so remember we multiply our A, and A is an understood 1. So we do 1 times 15, which would be positive 15. All right. Remember that we don't put any letters into our X box. We only care about the numbers. I don't care about the X's for the X box. Okay? All right, and then my B value is what goes down here. Now you'll notice that B value is negative. Make sure you keep it negative when you write it down here. It will make a big difference. I've got 2 numbers here that I need to find. And they would need to multiply to give me 15 and add to give me negative 8. Okay, so let's think about this. Let's just start with the signs. All right. Well, if I'm multiplying and I'm getting a positive, that means my signs have to either be both positive or both negative. That's the only way I can multiply and get a positive. Okay? So which one is it? Well, let's look down here. I'm adding and I'm getting a negative. So there's my answer right there. Both of these have to be negative, right? That would multiply to give me a positive and add to give me a negative. Okay, so both of them have to be negative. Now let's think about our numbers. Let's think of everything that goes into 15. Well, 15 is a pretty easy number to think about. So 1 and 15, and also 3 and 5, right? So I know they are both going to be negative, so my order doesn't matter. Which one of these two sets would add to give me negative 8. So negative 1 plus negative 15, there is no way that's going to be negative 8. That's not possible. Okay, so cross that one out. Test it out if you need to, but it's not going to work. What about negative 3 minus 5? Negative 3 plus negative 5. That would give me negative 8. And again, don't try to do this in your head if you're not quite ready for that yet. Use your calculator. Double check yourself, okay? Easy to make a mistake here. Negative 3 minus 5. Now, a lot of students ask, well, what if I put the 5 first and then the 3? As long as your signs are the same, like they are here, order doesn't matter. So I could have written the 5 first and the 3 second, or as I've already written it, it doesn't matter, okay? So we use these two numbers to turn this trinomial into a 4-term problem. We're going to expand it, okay? And to do that, I keep my A value the same. My B value is what's going to split into, okay? Using these two new numbers and their signs. So I've got negative 3x. Remember, our B value always has an x. So both of your new terms need to have x with it, with them. And your C value stays the same, plus 15, equals 0. You got to bring down this equals 0 with you. Bring it down every single time, okay? So now we have expanded this trinomial into a 4-term problem. And how do we solve 4-term problems? We factor by grouping. So, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you definitely need to go back and review some of those videos, okay? Let's factor out our GCF of our first grouping, x squared minus 3x. Hopefully this process, factoring out the GCF, is becoming a little easier for you the more you do it. So 1 and 3, well, the largest number I could factor out would be 1. And then I've got x squared and x. So the largest thing I can factor out is just an x. So let's factor that out. Let's divide it out. X squared divided by x, well, 2 minus 1 would be just 1, so just x. Negative 3 divided by positive 1 would be negative 3. My x's cancel. End of parentheses. Let's come over here. Remember, it's always so important to include the sign with that second grouping, because that's what we're going to bring down. Whatever that sign is, you have to bring it down. It's negative. Okay, so 5x and 15. Well, let's see. 5 will go into 5 once. 5 will go into 15 3 times. So we're going to pull out a 5. I can't pull out an x because even though that one has one, that one doesn't. So let's fill in what we have. Divide out that negative 5. And that's important to remember. We're not dividing out a positive 5. We pulled out that negative, and we were very clear in writing it down. So you have to divide out the negative 5. That's a very common error that I see, and it can lead to wrong answers. So make sure you include the sign with it. Negative 5 divided by negative 5 would just be 1. Those would cancel. And then you've got your x. Positive 15 divided by negative 5, that'd be negative 3. And then we got our equals 0. Okay, so at this point in our factor by grouping, we look at our groups and we say, did we create twins? All right, is there a twin here and here? Yes. So you know you've done everything right. You can feel confident in that. So I group together what I have in front of the parentheses. All this should just be a review at this point. And I'll write one twin. Okay, now I've got this equals 0 I have to bring down. So this is the new part. This is the part where we actually are solving. You're going to take each parenthesis set and set them equal to 0 individually. So we're saying this x minus 5 will be equal to 0. And this x is a 5. It looks kind of like an S. And this x minus 3, we're going to set that equal to 0 as well. So we're just kind of breaking it down. We're setting this equal to 0 and this equal to 0. Now, we've created two algebra equations that we're going to solve. So let's think, x minus 5 equals 0. How could I solve that for x? Well, I would need to move the 5 over. And in order to do that, I'd have to add 5. Right? Add 5. So I would get x equals 5. What about over here? This is a minus 3. I want to get x alone, so I would need to add 3. Add 3. And I would get x equals 0 plus 3 is 3. So I now have 2 answers. All right, so the way that we write this is we do x equals little brace. We call that symbol a brace. And we would do 3, comma, 5. End brace. So what this is this is a solution set to that trinomial. X could be 3 and x could also be 5. All right, either one of those you could plug in here and it would give you a true statement. So really we just added on just like 2 steps and that's it. It's the same thing we've already been learning. We're just going to take that equals 0 a little bit. That makes it go a little bit further. Okay, so that's how we actually solve by factoring. Let's look at this example right here. First thing I need to do is make sure that it's equal to 0. Hopefully you'll notice that you've got an equals 32 here. I cannot factor with that. I have got to get everything on the same side, a 0 on the right, and then I'll be ready to factor. All right, so how could I move this 32 over? Well, I would need to subtract 32, right? This is being added, so I want to do the opposite and subtract. If I'm going to do that here, I'm going to do it over here too. So let's see, I'd end up with x squared. I can't combine that 4x, negative 4x, and negative 32. Those aren't like terms, so I'll just rewrite them, keeping their signs the same. And now I have equals 0. Okay, make sure you write them in our quadratic form order. Okay, so the x squared first, the x second, and the constant last. All right, that's very important. Don't get that out of order because it'll totally mess you up when you try to go and do the x box. All right, next question we ask ourselves is, do we have a GCF? Okay, 1, 4, and 32. So the highest GCF would be 1, which isn't going to do anything. I've got an x here, no x there, so I can't pull an x out. So no, there's no GCF. I'm good to go with factoring. So I'm going to use my AC method. I'm going to go ahead and draw my x box. And I'm going to label my A, my B, and my C. Okay, now with my x box, my A times my C, that A is an understood 1. 1 times negative 32, which would be negative 32. My B value goes in the bottom, negative 4. Now, let's think about this. We've got 2 numbers we're trying to find. Okay, they're going to multiply to give me negative 32. They're going to add to give me negative 4. So let's talk about signs real quick. If I'm multiplying and I'm getting a negative, that only leaves me one option. That tells me I have 1 negative and 1 positive. Okay, that is the only way I could multiply and get a negative. Okay, if these were both positive, that would give me a positive. If they were both negative, that would give me a positive. So the only option is for 1 to be negative and 1 to be positive. It doesn't even matter what the B value sign is. Okay, so let's think about numbers now. 32 is a relatively low number. I could probably just name some things, but you know what? Let's just use our calculator trick. Let's make sure we show that. All right. So for our calculator trick, I'm going to go to my y equals. I'm going to type in the number I want to know all the factors of. So 32 divided by x. Now, I know it might be a little confusing because I'm typing in positive 32, and I know that's a negative 32. Whether something's negative or positive, it doesn't affect the factors of that number. Whether I typed in negative 32 or positive 32, it's not going to change the numbers at all. In fact, I think it kind of overcomplicates it because it'll start showing you negatives and positives in your table, and I think it just overcomplicates it, okay? just keep it positive. We just want to know, we know 1 is going to be negative, 1's going to be positive. We've already figured that out. We just want to know the numbers. What numbers go into 32? Okay. So let's see, creating a or table. So I see 1 and 32. I'm just going to kind of note these to the side. 2 and 16. All right, I see 4 and 8. Let's see if there are any more. And then I see 8 and 4. So I know I've hit everything. Once you start repeating, so 4 and 8 and now 8 and 4, you know you've gotten everything. All right, let's see. So looking at our options here, I've got 3 sets to look at. Which one of these could potentially, with 1 being negative and 1 being positive, would add to give me negative 4? So if I had 1 and 32, it doesn't matter which one I make negative or positive. There's no way 1 and 32 are going to add to give me negative 4. And you can check it if you need to. You know, do negative 1 plus 32, negative 32 plus 1, but that's not going to work. Okay, what about 2 and 16? There's no way I can combine 2 and 16 and get negative 4. It's just not going to happen. Not through adding. Okay, and then let's see, 4 and 8, those are our last options, and I'm definitely seeing, yeah, I think that might work. So which one would need to be negative and which one would need to be positive? Well, let's try both. So bring your calculator out. If you're not good with mental math, which a lot of us aren't, including myself, I'm really not. I like to use the calculator. So let's try both. Do negative 4 plus 8. Let's see what that gives us. That gives us positive 4. So is that what we need? No, we need a negative 4. So let's try the opposite. Let's do negative 8 plus 4. That gives us negative 4, and that's what we need. Okay? So we said negative 8 plus 4. Those are our 2 numbers, okay? They multiply to give us negative 32. They add to give us negative 4. So there we go. Now I'm going to use those 2 numbers to turn this trinomial into a 4-term problem. So bring down the A. A doesn't change. B is going to get split between these 2 new numbers, negative 8, x, and positive 4, x. Remember, we're putting the x on because our B value always has an x with it. And C doesn't change. So now we have a 4-term problem. How do we solve 4-term problems? We factor by grouping, always. All right. GCF of my first group, hopefully this is becoming much easier now. It would be x. Let's divide that x out. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 8 divided by 1 would be negative 8. X divided by x cancels. Bring down this sign, okay, positive. 4 and 32, well I know 4 goes into 4. Does 4 go into 32? Yeah, so we'll bring that down. All right, and I can't pull an x out because that has 1, but that doesn't, so positive 4 is it. Let's factor it out. So 4 divided by 4 cancels, just left with x. Negative 32 divided by positive 4, that'd be negative 8. And I didn't bring my equals down here, shame on me. Make sure you're bringing that down all the way. Okay, it's easy to kind of forget it up at the top and then before you know it, you're all the way down and you forgot about it. Make sure you bring it down as you go. All right, so now I want to group, well, first make sure, did I create twins? Yes, I did. So I know I've done a good job. All right, group what you have in front of the parentheses and write 1 twin. And your equals 0. Now because of that equals 0, we got to take this 1 step further. Okay, I've got to set both of these equal to 0. So I'll do x plus 4 equals 0 and x minus 8 equals 0. I'm going to solve both of these for x. So for this one, to get x alone, I would need to subtract 4. And I get x equals negative 4. And for this one, I would need to add 8, and I would get x equals 8. Okay, so to write this in a very formal way, we would do x equals our little brace symbol, -4, comma, 8. So notice this is not an ordered pair. Okay, it's not surrounded by parentheses, it's not an xy value. These are both x values. We're just showing these are solutions to that equation. Solutions that would make it true. Okay, -4 is one and 8 is one. Those are the only ones. Okay, let's look at some more examples. So in this one, I've got a trinomial, 1, 2, 3. And I've got an equation, I see the equal sign, and it's set equal to 0. So that's good. I don't need to move anything over. It's already set equal to 0. Okay, so my first question when factoring a trinomial is, do I have a GCF? Okay, so let's see. As far as numbers, I've got 1, 10, and 16. So the biggest number that can come out of that is just 1. So that's not going to help me at all. What about my x's though? I've got x cubed, x squared, and then just an x. So I can absolutely pull out a GCF of x. And let's see what we would have left. So I want to factor out the x. X cubed divided by x to the first. So that would end up with x squared. 10 divided by 1 would just be positive 10. X squared divided by x would just be x. 16 divided by 1 would just be positive 16. X divided by x, those would cancel. Okay? So now we've got our GCF factored out. And that's going to be, it's going to come into play in just a minute, and it's going to be part of my answer. But I'm not going to use it for a little bit. So I don't want to forget about it, so I have a trick where I just circle it. I do a little arrow to loop around, and that way it'll catch my attention and I won't forget to add it into the answer. So I'm going to rewrite x squared plus 10x plus 16 equals 0. I'm going to go ahead and factor this using my AC Xbox method. So I label my A, my B, and our C. Now that A is that understood 1. So some of you I know need to see it. So I'm going to add it in there. Alright, so A times C goes up top. 1 times 16 is 16. And then my B value, positive 10. Okay, so I need to figure out my two numbers that multiply to give me 16 and add to give me 10. Let's just worry about the signs first. So if I'm multiplying and getting a positive, that tells me that these could either be both positive or both negative. So let's look down here and see. If I'm adding and getting a positive, well, there we go. That tells me that both of these numbers have to be positive. And if you want to remember that little trick that if you got a positive here and a positive here, you're going to have a double positive there. Okay, so now I need to worry about the numbers. So let me think of everything that goes into 16. If you're not good with your multiplication tables, use the calculator trick that I previously showed. But I know everything off the top of my head that goes into 16, so I'm just going to write that out. 1 and 16, 2 and 8, and 4 and 4. So which of those numbers, which set, would add to give me 10, knowing that both my numbers would be positive? So 1 plus 16 is 17. That's not what I need. 2 plus 8, that is 10. So that one looks good. Let me just verify that by checking the other one, make sure that doesn't work. 4 and 4, that would be 8, so that's not what I need. So 2 and 8 are going to be my two new numbers. So they're going to help me turn this trinomial into a 4-term problem. I'm going to expand it. So remember, my A stays the same. My B splits into 2. Okay, using these two new numbers. Positive 2. Don't forget that the B value has an x with it. Plus 8, x. And then my C value stays the same. Plus 16. Can't forget that equals 0. You got to keep bringing that down. Okay, so now I have a 4-term problem. So how do I solve 4-term problems? I factor by grouping. So I group together my first two terms and my last two terms. Make sure to always include that sign with the second term. So let's factor out the GCF of the first term. X squared and 2x. As far as 1 and 2, the biggest number I could pull out would be 1. But with x squared and x, I could pull out an x. So let's factor out, divide out that x. X squared divided by x would just leave me x. 2 divided by 1 would leave me 2. X divided by x would cancel. Bring down this sign. Okay. 8 and 16, my GCF would be 8. I know 8 goes into 8. I also know 8 goes into 16. So my GCF would be 8. I can't bring an x out because even though that one has one, that one doesn't. So let's factor out this positive 8. 8 divided by 8, those would cancel to 1. So I just have x left. Positive 16 divided by 8 would leave me with positive 2 equals 0. So did I create twins? Yes, I did. So I know I've done everything right so far. So what I do next is I write my two terms at the front of the parentheses, and then I write one twin, just one, equals 0. Now, here's where this x way back here is going to come into play. It goes in the front as well. Now, before, when we were just doing expressions, we said, oh, just leave that, that's your answer. Well, because we're taking this a little further, I not only am going to set that x plus 8 equal to 0, and the x plus 2 equal to 0, I'm also going to set this third expression equal to 0. Okay, so this time I'm going to have 3 terms. So here, solving for x, I don't really need to. X is already alone, so I know one of my values of x is 0. All right, x plus 8 equals 0. I would subtract 8 from both sides, and I would have x equals negative 8. Here, I'd subtract 2 from both sides, and I would end up with x equals negative 2. Okay, so this time I have 3 answers instead of just 2. So my x would be equal to, we do our little brace, and you want to list them in order from lowest to highest, would just be good form. So negative 8, negative 2, and 0. End brace. All right, let's look at this example. So you'll notice this is a binomial. So this one will be a little different. We have to remember how to solve binomials. And we are solving it because there is an equal 0. So we'll be taking that additional step where we actually solve. But instead of using the X box, this is a binomial. So we've got to remember, binomial, you should think difference of perfect squares. Do I have a difference of perfect squares? Okay. First question we ask is, do I have a GCF that I can pull out? So looking here and looking here, no. No GCF, so I can go ahead and ask myself, do I have a difference of perfect squares? So let's think about it. Is it a difference? Okay, are we subtracting? Yes, so we're good there. Is x squared a perfect square? Could I take the square root of x squared and get a solid, in this case, variable? Yes, it would be x. Okay, what about 4? Is 4 a perfect square? Yes. It's 2. 2 times 2 is 4. And you can check your calculator. Just do square root of 4 and see if you get a whole number. If you do, it's a perfect square. Okay, so since I do have a difference of perfect squares, remember that I create, one would be negative and one would be positive. So I would look at my x squared and say the square root of x squared would be x. So I put 1x here and 1x there. We said the square root of 4 is 2, so I put 1, 2 there, and 1, 2 there. And I bring down my equal 0. Can't forget that. So before, we were used to stopping here, but because of that equal 0, we can no longer stop here. When we have that, we've got to keep going until we fully solve this. So I've got to do x minus 2 equals 0 and x plus 2 equals 0. So let's solve for x. In this equation, I would add 2 to both sides, trying to get my x alone, and x would equal 0 plus 2 is 2. Over here, I would subtract 2 from both sides, trying to get the x alone. X would be 0 minus 2 is negative 2. So there's a couple ways you could write this. We'll use the brace like we've been doing. X equals negative 2 and positive 2. But I want to show you guys that some people would write this when you've got the same number, just with different signs. You might see this written as positive or negative 2. So if you ever see that, that's what it's saying. It could be a positive 2 or it could be a negative 2. So it's kind of just like a shorthand version way to write it. So if you ever see that, that's what that means. All right, this has been Miss Math Tutorials.